Our top stories for tonight. His Majesty and Mahmoud Abbas hold talks on reviving Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations and coordination with the new U.S. administration on the status quo of Jerusalem. The commander of the Iraqi counter-terrorism service, dubbed the Hero, takes journalists on a tour inside the homes once occupied by Daesh terrorists in eastern Mosul. And 11 of 13 OPEC members, along with 11 non-OPEC countries, make a strong start to lowering their oil output under the first such pact in more than a decade. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty King Abdullah held talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas here at home on efforts to breathe new life into the frozen Middle East peace process, among other ongoing developments in the region. The talks at Al Husseiniya Palace underscored the significance of the upcoming Arab summit that Jordan is hosting in late March, where the issue of Jerusalem and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are high on the agenda. His Majesty told Abbas that as the summit chair, Jordan will seek to bring momentum to the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative regarding the Palestinian issue. King Abdullah and Abbas highlighted the need for continued cooperation on how to kickstart effective peace talks based on a two-state solution and international legitimacy leading to an independent Palestinian state. On Jerusalem, His Majesty said Jordan will work with all regional and international parties to safeguard the historic status quo in the Holy City. He also spoke of the need for coordination with the new U.S. administration and Congress to point out the repercussions of any decision affecting the status quo of Jerusalem on regional peace and security. A White House statement just in said talks to fulfill Donald Trump's pledge to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem are still in the early stages. Spokesman Sean Spicer said, quote, "We are at the very beginning stages of even discussing this subject," unquote. A royal decree was issued approving the Prime Ministry's decision to appoint Sheikh Abdul Karim Al Khassaune as Chief Justice. Another royal decree has appointed Dr. Muhammad Ahmed Al Khalaili as the kingdom's Grand Mufti, enjoying the status of a cabinet minister. His Royal Highness Prince Ali bin Al Hussein conveyed a verbal message from His Majesty the King to Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jabir Al Sabah, tackling Jordanian-Kuwaiti ties and the latest developments in the region. King Abdullah reaffirmed his keen interest in consulting and maintaining coordination with Sheikh Sabah on various Arab and regional issues, leading to enhanced Arab and Islamic solidarity and addressing the various challenges. The Emir of Kuwait sent greetings to His Majesty and his wishes for progress and prosperity to the Jordanian people. The Cabinet reviewed a number of recommendations presented by the lower house of Parliament during their debate of the 2017 draft general budget in relation to addressing a growing budget deficit and rising debt. Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki directed the Finance Minister to review the limits on maximum and minimum wage and the effect that any future adjustment would have on the sectors. Mulki also instructed the Cabinet to ban re-employment of retired civil servants who have previously ceased to serve due to a medical condition. He also requested a review of any duplicity in board membership in public sector companies so as to ensure that board members do not get multiple remuneration. Mulki told the ministers that their travels on missions will be on economy class with the exception of long-haul flights. The measures are part of government's implementation of the House of Recommendations. Separately, Prime Minister al-Mulki briefed the Senate's Financial and Economic Committee on measures undertaken by his government to deal with economic challenges, namely downsizing government expenditure, including lowering the wages and benefits of senior public servants. Mulki said there are serious economic challenges with debt reaching unprecedented levels, adding that the situation demands an economic reform plan which transcends ensuring funds to offset the budget deficit but to create a resilient economy. He listed the main features of the 2017 general budget passed by the lower house on Thursday, saying a big chunk goes to cover the salaries of a bloated administration. He assured there will be no tax hikes on basic food commodities and that any price raise will only affect luxury items. The Senate President, Faisal Al-Fayez, urged the government to address such issues as tax evasion and focus on projects that create jobs and help alleviate poverty. A military statement said border guards have thwarted a number of attempts by individuals from various nationalities to enter illegally into the kingdom's borders during the past few days. A Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army source said the border guard applied the rules of engagement, arrested all infiltrators, and referred them to the concerned authorities. Israel approved building permits for hundreds of housing units in 3 East Jerusalem settlements. Jerusalem City Hall approved the building permits for more than 560 units in 3 urban settlements, areas annexed to Jerusalem, in a move that is unrecognized internationally. The housing projects were taken off the Jerusalem municipality's agenda in December at the request of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in order to avoid further censure from the administration of Barack Obama. But with the inauguration of Donald Trump, Israel's right wing expects the new president's attitude towards settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem to be more supportive than that of Obama. The Palestinians denounced the move and have said it would kill any prospect for peace.
By targeting specifically Jerusalem, they are making use of the statements during the Trump elections campaign about recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and therefore legalizing Israel's illegal annexation of Jerusalem in order to expand its settlement activities in Jerusalem, particularly in the 2 areas of Ramat Eshkol and Ramot, which would entirely surround East Jerusalem, which is occupied Palestinian territory, and would cut it off from the rest of its Palestinian environment and would bisect the West Bank and therefore prevent the establishment of a territorially contiguous or even viable Palestinian state.
To Iraq, the Iraqi army announced that all districts of Mosul east of the Tigris River have been cleared of Daesh terrorists, except Al-Rashidiyya in the north. The army announced the news, adding that Colonel Subhan Hassan al-Jbouri died today in fighting on the eastern bank of the river. Al-Jbouri commanded the 71st Army Brigade, and he was the highest-ranking officer killed since the offensive to retake Mosul started in October. The Mosul Hotel, a landmark hotel in Iraq, meanwhile, was destroyed by Daesh terrorists to prevent advancing Iraqi forces from using the building as a base in their offensive. The Mosul Hotel, in the shape of a stepped pyramid, stands close to the Tigris River that divides the city. The next phase of the offensive is expected to kick off in a few days. Still in Iraq, a group of journalists were taken on a tour inside the homes once occupied by Daesh terrorists in eastern Mosul. The top commander of Iraq's counter-terrorism service, Lieutenant General Abdul Wahab al-Saadi, dubbed by the locals as a hero, led the house-to-house tour in the Muhandisin neighborhood. In one place, there were screws packed into explosives to kill and maim, as well as wires and detonators. And in another home, instructions were found on how to make bombs. Laminated guides on the range of various weapons could also be found, indicating the terrorists well versed on how to employ anti-tank missiles. One house was clearly dedicated to the production of small drone aircraft used for both surveillance and attacks. Several lay scattered on the floor. Evidence also indicated that Daesh terrorists had converted a villa on the street into a prison and torture chamber. People were held on the top floor in rooms with steel bars.
We don't have specific information on the numbers of prisoners they had. The civilians here told us they don't know how many people were there, but that they used to hear the screams of the prisoners being held there, probably because of the torture. People who are being brought here, I expect they were the ones who used to disobey them in jihad or in the fighting, or those who don't observe their rules among civilians.
As the Kazakh capital Astana readies itself to host the Syria peace talks, Syria's UN ambassador Bashar al-Jafari, head of the Syrian delegation to the peace talks, says the main points on the agenda are strengthening the ceasefire and reaching common ground on fighting terrorism. The talks will bring rebels and government representatives, including military officers, around the table for the first time, following earlier faltered political talks in Geneva. Turkey and Russia brokered a ceasefire in Syria, which has largely held in the run-up to the Astana talks. Jafari voiced hope that with the new U.S. administration under Trump, the American side will be more positive towards a political solution.
The meeting covers a number of points: installing ceasefire lines, differentiate between the armed groups that agreed to go to Astana, separate those groups from the Nusra Front and Daesh, and find common ground with the participants to fight terrorism together. This will be a test of the credibility for those who are going to be at the table in Astana, or those who employ them in relation with fighting terrorism.
In Damascus, residents are looking forward to the upcoming inter-Syrian negotiations in Astana in the hope that talks could bring a solution to the near 6-year-old conflict in the country. They pray for the success of the talks, citing the weariness of the people who have become fed up with the prolonged war. And they say reconciliation has to happen in the country for the conflict to end.
I wish the conference in Astana could be successful because people got tired of the crisis.
We must seek to reconcile and restore the good spirit to Syria. We need the good to overwhelm us and the crisis to end.
11 of the 13 members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, along with 11 non-OPEC countries, have made a strong start to lowering their oil output under the first such pact in more than a decade. The decision came during the first meeting on oil deal compliance in Vienna, Austria, where participants agreed to make cuts for the first half of the year. OPEC members Nigeria and Libya, both suffering setbacks in production, were given exemptions. It was agreed that a technical joint committee would be created, comprising a representative for each of the 5 members of the monitoring committee, and as well as the OPEC presidency, which is currently held by Saudi Arabia. The monitoring committee will communicate after the 17th of every month, with the next meeting in March set for Kuwait.
For the extension of the another 6 months. Again, as said earlier, we will review the data at the end of the 6 months period, and we will meet in Vienna in May, and we will consider the extension if required.
Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said Russia should part with the illusion that Western sanctions against the country will be lifted soon. He made the remarks during a meeting of the United Russia Party. A Kremlin spokesman said Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to meet Trump, but preparations for the possible meeting may take months, not weeks. Putin and other high-ranked Russian officials have publicly praised U.S. President Donald Trump, expecting him to lift U.S. sanctions on Moscow. Tensions between the West and Moscow over separatist unrest in the east of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea in 2014 led to several rounds of international sanctions being introduced against Russian individuals, companies, and officials. British Prime Minister Theresa May promised to challenge any unacceptable talk when she meets U.S. President Donald Trump later this week. She made the remarks in a BBC show. As one of the first world leaders to meet Trump after the inauguration, the visit comes as May tries to secure Britain's special relationship with the new U.S. administration. She is expected in the U.S. on Friday.
Yes, I'm going to be at the end of the week, and I shall be meeting him on Friday and talking to him on Friday. And there'll be many issues for us to talk about, because obviously the special relationship between the UK and the US has been strong for many years. We'll have opportunity to talk about our possible future trading relationship, but also some of the world challenges that we all face, issues like defeating terrorism, the conflict in Syria.
The annual Qigong Lantern Festival displayed its beauty in Sichuan province in southwest China. Unlike Occidental light shows, which feature tungsten bulbs, fluorescent tubes, LEDs, and even laser beams, Oriental light shows still stick to their traditional concepts of using paper and fabric to shape up the various objects of fame and fortune. The only change is from traditional lighting source of wax candles to electrical bulbs, tubes and LEDs inside these lanterns. The festival, one of the largest folk cultural activities in China, attracts people from the country and around the world. It is also held in many other countries around the world, such as the US, South Korea, Japan and the Netherlands. It runs until March 12th. Top seed and reigning champion Angelique Kerber was bundled out of the fourth round of the Australian Open by big-hitting American Coco van der Weeg, losing 6-2, 6-3 on the Rod Laver Arena. The 25-year-old New Yorker claimed a place in the quarterfinals at Melbourne Park for the first time, blasting 6 aces and 30 winners to overpower Kerber. Van der Weeg, who celebrated her biggest career victory with a shrug of the shoulders, moves on to meet Spanish 7th seed Garbine Muguruza in the last 8. 6-1, 4-6, 6-3 to book a place in the Australian Open quarterfinals. After 6 months out of the game, Federer's fairy tale return continued under the lights of Rod Laver Arena, where he emphatically quashed doubts about his fitness. And finally, the weather forecast. Low temperatures continue in most regions for the rest of tonight, with a minimum of 5 degrees Celsius in Amman. Frosty conditions are expected in the late hours of tonight in the hilly areas, Badia and eastern plains. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures is expected, but it remains relatively cold in the hilly areas and fair in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, with southeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively warm conditions tomorrow, with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Before we conclude, here's a quick recap of our top stories. His Majesty and Mahmoud Abbas hold talks on reviving Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations and coordination with a new U.S. administration on the status quo of Jerusalem. The commander of the Iraqi counterterrorism service, dubbed the Hero, takes journalists on a tour inside the homes once occupied by Daesh terrorists in eastern Mosul. And 11 of 13 OPEC members, along with 11 non-OPEC countries, make a strong start to lowering their oil output under the first such pact in more than a decade. We've come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Dana Abusham. Thanks for watching and have a good night.